Hello again. We discuss now the allegory of the cave, and I want to remind all of us that the allegory of the cave, which is one of the most famous story in all philosophy, and certainly one of the famous story in Plato's own writings, is placed in a context after two other stories. One is the simile of the sun, as you have it in your translation, and then the other one is the line or the image of the line. There you go. And all three of them are supposed to make the distinction between the world of the intelligible and the world of the appearances, and between knowledge on the one hand, which is connected with the intelligibles, and doxa, opinion, which is connected with appearances. And I have this picture that I will use today. I did not do it. In fact, is a former professor of mine, Dr. Mark Gifford, with whom I have taken graduate courses in ancient philosophy, one of my favorite teachers. Forgive me, all the other teachers I have, all of you are my favorite teachers, but with him I had a special connection. And I will explain, first of all, the story with a cave by showing you this picture. So what we have here is a cave in which, as Plato says, there are some prisoners. They are the prisoners who have been enchained from the beginning of their life. So they were born this way, and they were enchained in such a way that they could not see each other, and they could not see anything behind them. What they saw was a wall in front of them, and on this wall there were certain shadows. Their own shadows, because they could see themselves, but they could also see. So I do not understand who I am, but I see my shadow, but they could also see some other shadows that were given to them because some other people who are here behind the wall were carrying some artifacts, and the artifacts were giving those shadows because there was a fire towards upper in the cave, so the fire could give all those shadows of the artifacts that other people were holding, and they were carrying around. So the shadows that the prisoners could see were always moving and appearing or disappearing, and they thought that those shadows they could see on the wall are realities themselves. What were the artifacts? So imagine, for example, that you have a horse, and I can make a horse out of wood or out of the paper and so on, and I can carry it like a puppeteer. I can carry it behind the wall, and because I have the light behind me, the light reflects on the wall that it's in front. I reflects the shadow, not of the real object, remember that, but reflects of the shadow of the artifact of the, I think I said horse, I don't remember, or dog, of the dog, which is made out of wood or made out of paper, of carton, right? Carton, I think. Okay, so this is us. Socrates says to Glaucon, they are like us. Glaucon says, whoa, this is a funny image. Yeah, but they are like us. Why are they like us? Because we seem to be almost born in a cave. We always are surrounded by appearances. We are told by other people what to believe and so on. And once I described an image which I once heard from somebody, I don't remember from whom. But it goes this way, if our minds are like rooms, our minds are populated by ideas. Yeah, our rooms are populated by pieces of furniture, by books. You see behind me my bookshelf. Man, uh, the place of the mind is, the mind is not occupied with objects, but it's occupied with ideas. And all of those ideas come to us in birth, after birth, from our peers, from our observations, from our senses, from ideas that people tell us, like parents, friends, school, TV, and so on. And they form there a certain multitude of things which are no longer in consistency. And what Plato is saying is that we are like this in a cave. Now, somebody can take us out of the cave by force. Remember that the one prisoner who goes out does not go out because he just wakes up one day and he leaves, but rather goes by force. The Republic is a book about a political system, but it's also a book about education, what education means. And I'm fairly certain that all of us agree that education is not an easy thing. Education hurts. We put ourselves through education because we want to achieve something later, and often we are upset and we do not want to go any longer because we perceive the pain through which our minds and sometimes our bodies go in order for us to achieve the education. In that sense, Plato perceives education as a curative element, the same way in which we go to the hospital to get cured. Sometimes surgeries and what we do in order to get cured hurt us. We take pills and we go through all of, and we know now with all this virus how much people can be in pain and so on. But we do all this, we go to medication, and God bless all of you who are working in healthcare. And I know that all of you, my students, will become nurses or medical assistants or social workers or in health sciences and so on. May you all be well. But what would you do? That's what you do. You do what an educator does. You bring someone from darkness to light. What happens though? When this prisoner comes out to the light, he sees the light of the sun, and his eyes are not adjusted to light because all his life he was in the darkness of the cave. And the first reaction that he has is that he no longer sees anything. He goes completely in a state in which he can no longer express opinions. He is in the state of what Plato calls aporia, or no limits. He has no way in which he can actually give a definition. The state in which all of the previous Socratic dialogues, the one in which we have no definition, end, because we ask questions about them, but all of a sudden, coming out of the cave, we see that in fact we see nothing. And then slowly he gets adjusted to reality itself, and he sees first. That's a very important in Plato, the chronology, so to say. He doesn't see the real objects, but first he sees the shadows of the real objects in the water of the lake or on the surface of the land because of the sun. And then slowly, as his eyes adjust, he sees the real object, the real tree. Here he saw the shadow of the tree, the real tree. And then even more slowly, after he sees during the night the sun and the moon, not the sun during the night, the moon and the stars and the various other planets that he may be able to see, celestial objects, if I call them this way, finally his eyes get adjusted to see the sun. This is the world of knowledge. This is the world of opinion. If you remember the two lines divided, here is the world of doxa. Doxa is opinion. Here is the world of episteme, of understanding, of knowledge. Now, remember, the allegory of the cave is an allegory, so do not understand that this is reality. I mentioned in the previous video that all those things which exist do not have reality for Plato. So the real tree for Plato is not the tree I see in the garden or the tree I see in the forest, but it's the idea itself that I understand with my mind. The sun is the form of goodness which gives being to all of the things which I can understand with my mind, with the intelligibles themselves. The way in which we live is here, in the cave. And Plato's allegory of the cave shows not only how we can distinguish between knowledge and opinion, and between the intelligibles and the sensible, or the intelligibles and the objects that participate in change, but rather is also about understanding how life works. Because the philosopher king, is required to go back into the cave. He's required to go back into the cave because he cannot live by himself in the wonderful world of the ideas, but he rather wants to help the people around him. And what happens to him? What happens exactly to Socrates? He comes back into the cave and he no longer seems to understand the things around him. Everybody believes he is a schmuck, Everyone believes that he talks in circle, as people often say about Socrates. But in fact, what actually is the case is that his eyes are no longer accustomed to all the images on the wall, and he can no longer actually explain the same way in which all the other prisoners can explain the shadows and how they follow one another and so on. And what do to him? They murder him, just as it happened to Socrates. But for our purposes now, what's most important is this distinction between knowledge, episteme, and opinion, doxa, and that it reminds us that often what we think we know and what we are so proud about is not knowledge, but it's rather our way of dealing with the reality of the cave. The allegory of the cave, I would claim, encourage us to be humble. Encourage us to be humble because it is not easy to go out of the cave. And going out of the cave presupposes hard work and presupposes humility, especially because we cannot give up our ways of life, our ways of understanding, of our ways which we consider to be understanding, unless we become a little bit humble and we allow those people who take us out to allow us to see the realities themselves, or we allow ourselves to take ourselves out to listen to that part in us which is able to have knowledge, and to listen to it and follow it out of the cave. May you all be well, and see you next week.